Well, hello, and welcome again to the 2012fad.com. I'll be your host for this evening, and my name is Charlie Bluehawk. Last night we talked about 1 million armed Americans and how in a country, a nation governed by a constitution, our country that used to be, which is now today a privately owned offshore corporation called the United States of America, in which you and I are just assets. Well, actually you, because I actually filed the paperwork to declare sovereignty over myself, so I am no longer an asset of whoever owns the corporation known as the United States of America, Inc., but you still are. We talked about how under a constitutional republic, you have the right to bear arms in your own defense, in the defense of your country, from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And how under the Constitution of the United States, which I'm guessing you haven't actually read, you have the right and you have the obligation to defend your own nation, your own country, which is why little George Bush, little King George V, referred to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as damn pieces of paper. It's a fear that our masters have of the written word, which is why about 100 years ago they stopped actually teaching us to read or write. Today, I've known so many people who spent 4, 5, 6 years at university and who told me themselves that they graduated from university illiterate. They could not, after 6 years in university. This one woman told me she couldn't read or write her own name. Now, I never went to major university. I got as far as junior college and discovered that I really didn't like the abuse from my teachers. And I needed to feed myself, so I went back to work. So I never could comprehend how somebody could spend 6 years at a university and not know how to read or write. I still haven't figured that out. I've since gotten a couple of messages on the blog site on last night's show, 1 Million Armed Americans, saying that in today's society they'd simply be considered terrorists and would be gunned down by the army. Probably true. At which point the masters would get what they want, civil war. Because our masters really want an armed conflict, Americans turning on Americans. So our masters can call in their largest private army, the United Nations, which is, well, it's a tool for our masters. It has nothing to do with helping human beings. It has everything to do with controlling the world for a very small handful of really, really sick, disturbed Satan worshippers. So we have to avoid civil war at all costs. At the same time, we have to take our country back. I know this won't happen. So I fled the country because I knew nobody would stand with me. But if there's a chance somebody's listening, there's always hope. And speaking of hope or fantasy, tonight I thought we might chat about fairy tales. Now I'm calling these fairy tales because, firstly, I cannot point you in any specific direction, say, go there, look, there's physical evidence, proves what this fairy tale is telling us, this story. I can't do that. I should actually say there are places I could point you to, but the reality is the closer you got to these places, the more likely it is that you would simply be killed. You would hope that you'd simply be killed. Because the closer you got to these places, the more likely it would be you'd simply be captured and tortured in ways that, well, you would be, one of the fairy tales is you would be chopped up while still alive and thrown into a vat of hydrogen peroxide while your body parts were simmered down for stew. There are fairy tales that you would be locked in cages and genetically modified in the most horrifying ways possible just for the fun of it. So I'm going to go with my first statement. There's no place I can point you to go to see physical proof of any of these stories, these fairy tales. And also, I personally have never seen any of these things with my own eyes. So I cannot say to you, yes, that's true because I've seen it. Because the truth is, I haven't. And I'm pretty grateful that I haven't. The closest I've ever gotten is I sat at a table once on Ventura Boulevard at a little dark cafe in a place called Studio City, which is a suburb of Los Angeles, which of course is in Southern California. And I was meeting with somebody, and the room was very dark. On that side of Ventura Boulevard, at late afternoon, we're in the shade of this little hill that separates what we call the valley from the basin, which is where you think of Los Angeles as being. And this fellow sitting in this very little dark coffee cafe was wearing very dark glasses, and yet I was sitting close enough to him at the table that I could see through his glasses, and I could see that the whites of his eyes were red. The whites of it, where his white eyes should have been, they were glowing red. And being really, really slow on the uptake, being just dumber than dirt as I am, I just sort of said to him, gee, your eyes are glowing red. Where the intelligent thing would be to, not pay attention and say nothing, but being stupid, I actually said, your eyes are glowing red. And he took off his sunglasses. He actually just perched them down on his nose, so I could clearly see his eyes were glowing red. And he leaned forward and said, I guess I'm going through a cleansing. To which I responded, oh, okay. And I literally didn't think about it. That's how far gone I was. So what was this individual? At the time, I just figured he was possessed by demons or something. Some spirit had made a deal with him and was devouring his body. And lately, I began to realize it might just have been one of our fairy tales tonight, a lizard in a human suit. So that's the closest I can say I've ever been to, well, let's just call them lizards, because apparently one of the fairy tales is that they don't like being called lizards. So we're going to call tonight's episode Fairy Tales because I've heard these stories over and over again, longer than 40 years that I've been talking to you about it. I heard the first fairy tale I can remember is one of the CIA, U.S. Army Air Corps intelligence street thugs that whose home I grew up in for a time. And it was two brothers, two twin brothers. They actually looked like Homer Simpson, but they weren't anywhere near as bright as Homer Simpson is, I'll tell you right now. They were money launderers, they were child rapists, they were arms smugglers, they were money launderers, they were real estate extortionists, they were petty thugs, they were liars. One of them seemed to have, I wouldn't say a conscience, I wouldn't say a soul. He might have had some inkling of a conscience, what a real human being would have. And so I think I had to be under 10 years old when this thug said to me, Jews eat Christian babies alive. And I looked at him, I said, stop it. Here I am, under 10 years old, and I'm telling this guy who must have been in his 60s to shut up, that, stop saying such stupid things to me. And he instantly shut up. They're all cowards, by the way. So here I am, 10 years old, telling this guy to shut up, and he actually does, because he told me that Jews eat Christian babies alive. I said, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Well, I'm 52 now, and the stories, the fairy tales I've heard, are that the Jews are being set up to take the fall for things they've never done. During World War II, for example, in Germany, we believe as Americans that the Nazi Party ruled everything in Nazi Germany. That simply isn't true. American corporations actually set Hitler up to do what he did. American corporations actually supplied Hitler with money and materials. Ford Motor Company supplied 25% of Hitler's mechanized forces. Ford Motor Company was sending parts to Germany during the war. This is on the congressional records. I forget which oil company was sending Hitler a special additive to put into the fuel supplies of his Messerschmitt aircraft, which were at the time very, very advanced, but couldn't fly without this special ingredient added to their fuel, which was being shipped over during the war from the United States. So you had American corporations supporting Hitler in the war against the United States. Very bizarre. And all this stuff you can look up. You don't need me for this. The other thing we never hear about is that there were actually two political parties active in Nazi Germany during Hitler's reign. One, of course, was the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Party in English. The other was something called the Zionists. Nobody really, even today, knows what Zionism is. It's not a religion. It's a political movement. What it truly is the worship of Satan. And Zionists, Satan worshippers, have been using the Jews as a cover for their activities for several decades now. They found the Jews very useful to be the scapegoat for their satanic black magic ritual practices. So what this old guy, this old CIA, U.S. Army Air Corps intelligence street thug was actually saying to me but didn't realize, what he was actually saying, not that he realized it, was that there was a group called Zionists, who you and I would call Satan worshippers, who were pretending to be Jews. But yes, they really were eating babies, human babies alive. It didn't matter if they were Christian or not. A fairy tale that I offer you today, because I cannot point anywhere and say, look, this is happening, here's your evidence. I can't point at a newspaper report, I cannot point at a physical place on the planet and say, go there and look. It is a fairy tale. But it's a fairy tale I've heard many, many times since then, from many, many different people. And the looks on their faces. I remember one woman telling me about a place called Victorville. Victorville is a place in, well, I was going to say Southern California. It's actually a place between Southern California and Las Vegas. And there's one highway that goes from Los Angeles to Las Vegas called the 15 Freeway. And halfway between Los Angeles and Las Vegas is Victorville. And it's a real creepy little desert town. It's not very large. There's not that many people there. But it's really, really creepy. And we've actually chatted about Victorville before as being a place where Satan worshippers are in complete control. And again, more fairy tales. I met a woman who was an undercover detective back when I was still trying to go to college. And the look on her face when she told me about the black magic rituals, the rape of young girls, keeping these young girls chained up until they had babies, and then watching their babies be ritually sacrificed by the rulers of Victorville. And at the time, I just sort of stared at her. I didn't know what to say, but the look of horror on her face, I'll never forget. And when she discovered that there were Wiccan people, I was working in the theater there at the time, when she discovered that there were Wiccan people working in the theater with me, she just went even more white, more terrified. And I never saw her again, because she told me that the Wiccan people were actively involved with the Satan worshippers in Victorville, raping and torturing young girls, children, and forcing them to have babies and then sacrificing their own babies that they put into these young girls in black magic ritual. Again, it's a fairy tale, but I keep hearing it. There's a fairy tale, for example, that the lizards, and I call them the lizards, came to our world millions of years ago. And they are terrified of space flight. Again, this is a fairy tale. So they like to travel in converted asteroids and moons. Here's something that's not a fairy tale. Our moon, the Earth's moon, scientists will tell you it is not native to our solar system. It's from somewhere else. The other interesting thing, which is not a fairy tale, interesting thing about our moon, it's in perfect orbit around the Earth, as if somebody parked it there. Why? And you can look this up for yourself. The moon spins just perfectly enough so we only ever see one side of it, ever. We only know, by looking up into the night sky, one side of the moon. Now, if you talk to someone who's a mathematician, a gambler, ask him what are the odds of a naturally occurring object being in perfect synchronous orbit so that we only ever see one side of it, ever. There are no odds. It's not possible. Because in nature, there's some random effect, let's say. All the other satellites of all the other planets in our solar system rotate on their own, so different faces, different sides of the moons are seen by, if you happen to live on Jupiter, you see all sides of all the moons. But we don't. The moon, according to the fairy tale, was used by the lizards, what some people call the Silurians, other people call the Draco. The moon actually came into our solar system and parked itself in perfect synchronous orbit around this Earth. The Earth where you and I and our ancestors have lived for 2.5 billion years. That's actually not a fairy tale. You can actually look up out-of-place artifacts on the internet. And it's really simple. Out-of-place artifacts. Look it up. You'll see imprints of a leather shoe, complete with stitching, in what was at the time mud, which is of course today rock, that are 2.5 billion years old. That's not a fairy tale. So you and I have been here for a fairly long time. But the fairy tale I've heard over and over again is that the Silurians, the lizard people, who are apparently a plague on the galaxy, again, a fairy tale, like to travel in ships that are actually moons. And they came to our Earth because, again, the fairy tale is humans who have been on this Earth for 2.5 billion years discovered that the universe is electrical. And being electrical, fairly simple to figure out, so they learned how to travel from planet to planet, from star to star. And they left. Because every 32,000 years, Earth flips end for end, which is kind of upsetting. And so human beings are everywhere, at least in this galaxy. And Earth is actually the cradle of the human race. So for some reason, hatred mostly, well, completely, the lizards came here to occupy the cradle of the human race. Again, it's a fairy tale. There's a fairy tale that the Earth and all planets are actually hollow. And this is something that actually isn't quite a fairy tale, because if you talk to an electromagnetic engineer, electrical engineer, and say to them, look, I've got this solid sphere of iron. And yet, in the core of this solid sphere of iron, which I can hold in my hand, it's a model, I've got a liquid core, which spins on its own. Can that hold a magnetic charge? The electrical engineer will say, no, not possible. But take an iron sphere that's hollow. It can hold a magnetic charge. Take an iron sphere that's hollow and has a, well, say a center sun, a power source. Then tap it, it rings like a bell. We've tapped our Earth numerous times, and it rings like a bell. NASA has sent spacecraft, actually I believe 1958, for some reason, NASA sent a nuclear bomb to the moon and set it off. The moon rang like a bell. It's hollow. Our Earth is hollow. The entrances are at the North and the South Pole, which, coincidentally, have perpetual fog banks. So even though you have satellites in space, you can't actually see what's going on through the fog. It's so thick. I'm sure we can. Our masters can. We can. Again, it's a fairy tale. There is a story I've heard over and over and over again, that when people see these little gray aliens, if they say, and they're Christian, they say the Lord's Prayer, it stops the gray aliens. It actually drives them away. How is that possible? Well, another fairy tale is that the war in the Christian heaven between the angels, where Lucifer, Satan, the devil, whatever you want to call it, went to war against God. And some of the angels sided with God, and some of the angels sided with the devil. To me, the war between the devil and God is like a lover's spat, a couple fighting. And we're the children, and we're caught in between. Who do you want to go with, mom or dad? So to me, the war against God by Satan is just a lover's quarrel, but that's a personal point of view. The fairy tale goes that God won, and threw the devil and the devil's worshippers into hell. Well, the fairy tale continues, unfortunately, that hell and the devil and the angels who became demons actually isn't a physical place in our universe, say. It's in a different dimension. We've talked about dimensions before. So God, in her infinite wisdom, sent her lover, the devil, into another dimension with her followers. The fairy tale is that the devil, Lucifer, Satan, found a way to re-enter our universe. And what she came up with is she seized on a race of physical beings and polluted them. These physical beings being the lizard people, the Silurians, the Draco. And so the story is, the fairy tale is, that the Greys, the lizards, the Draco, the Silurians, whatever you want to call them, are actually possessed creatures. And a possessed creature, by definition, has no soul. But the fairy tale is that Satan figured out how to send her fallen angels back into our universe mentally, and simply use these gray aliens, these lizards, as puppets. And so, when you encounter a gray alien, I'd personally shoot it in the head and ask questions later. But if you're a little more easygoing, start reciting a prayer from your holy book, from the Quran, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Bible, and see what it does. Personally, I just shoot it in the head and call it a day. Because after a lifetime of detesting violence, I'm beginning to see that violence has its place in, well, society. But then again, that's also a fairy tale. So the fairy tale is that the war between God and Satan, her lover, is real. And Satan has returned by sending her demons into the bodies of these lizard people who have become a plague on this part of the galaxy, if not further along. And it's an ongoing spat between girlfriends. And again, you and I are the children caught in between. Who do we go with? It's not a fairy tale that China has existed pretty much the way it has today for about the last 100,000 years. The Chinese worship the dragon as a symbol of wisdom. Actually, pretty much everywhere you go in any human culture, Asia, South America, Europe, you see the feathered serpent or the winged serpent, winged lizard, as a source of great wisdom. The fairy tale goes that the lizard people are ruled by winged serpents. The highest class of leader is a white-winged serpent, or so the fairy tale goes. It's interesting to me that we repeatedly on television have stories of alien visitors coming to Earth who are lizards wearing human suits and who eat human beings alive. There was a television show, I guess back in the 80s, called V for Visitors, or Victory. It's been recreated. And it clearly shows lizards wearing human suits, trying to pass as human. And again, the fairy tales go, the lizards walk among us using holographic projectors. The lizards walk among us. I don't know why. You know, are we that interesting to lizards? And we must be. But again, that's a fairy tale. What's not a fairy tale is that there's more going on in our world than our masters want us to know. Our history is polluted with lies. Reality around us is hidden from us. If you want to see reality, just drive at night outside of any major city. And just drive at night where there are no cities, no houses, no towns, nothing. You'll see interesting things. But because your mind can compartmentalize events, what your mind hears, what your mind sees, it's trying to keep you going. It's trying to keep you functioning. So it's going to compartmentalize events that you see and hear and keep them separated from each other for as long as it can, just so you can get through the day, just so you can get up and go to work in the morning. Just remember what we chatted about the other day. Your mind will compartmentalize things that you don't want to see. And then one day you'll say, oh my God, my girlfriend's been lying to me, she's been cheating on me. Why did I let her get away with it for as long as I did? Because I saw her doing it. It's your mind trying to save you. And in saving you, it hides reality from you. It's a tough call, but it's yours. An ancient prayer, an ancient wish, a blessing on a friend or on a blessed stranger. May you live as long as you wish. May you love as long as you live. For the 2012fad.com, this is Charlie Bluehawk. The 2012 Fad is brought to you by Coffee and Blood, Love Letters Between the Dead, a series of 5 erotica horror novels about a fallen angel finding his way back to regain his own soul, and how the CIA war against the human race, their black magic, captures and traps him in the body of a mind-controlled slave designed to hunt down and to kill their god, their Satan.